Welcome to the life of a global Desi.
A podcast that connects like-minded Desis all over the globe by conforming to stereotypes and breaking them.
Introducing Life of a Global Desi interviews.
Yes, we bring to you our conversations with remarkable global Desis who are doing some really cool things in life.
The idea is to bring fresh perspectives, add diverse voices, and expand the global Desi community. On to our episode now. The guest on today's show is Varun Singh, the Director for Strategy, Transformation and Consulting in the financial services industry based out of Gurgaon, India. His first love, though, are books, mostly fiction. You'll actually never catch him without one. He loves debating, anime, and enjoys any challenging work. If he wasn't doing what he's currently doing, he would definitely have made a great lawyer, a legislator, or a quantum theoretical physicist. I'm not really sure about that one. But what really makes him tick are the innumerable things that are left to learn, people to meet, places to see, and things to try. Oh, of course, debates to have. Varun works really hard and parties much, much harder. I can vouch for that. So without any further ado, on to our episode now. Hello, everyone. Today we have a very special guest on the podcast. One of my closest friends from undergrad, Varun Singh. Hey, Varun.
Hi.
Welcome. Yay.
Hi, Archana. Hi, Aarti.
So, quick context. Varun and I went to undergrad, did engineering together, and we've had some of the most fun conversations in college, did like a lot of crazy stuff. Everyone, like everyone does in colleges in India, and have been in touch since. In fact, more than in touch, we meet almost every December on really fun vacations. We've traveled all over the place. And so today we have him on our podcast.
Yay.
And we're super excited.
All right, so
Welcome, Varun. Yeah.
So Archana probably knows Varun since almost a little over 10 years now. How long has it been since you know Varun?
Actually,
No,
2004. 16
16 years.
Wow.
Varun, I know. Thanks. 2004 when we started undergrad
Wow,
together.
that's great. So you guys know each other for 16 years. This is for me to get to know you a little better. We're going to jump into the icebreaker. Well, to set some context, I know I called you Varun Bhaiya earlier. That's also because I'm so used to calling all of Sis's friends Bhaiyas or Didis. But for this podcast, for the purpose of this podcast, I will try and refrain from calling you Bhaiya. And so I've known Varun since, I guess, just through all the weddings that have crashed of Sis's friends and also Sis's wedding itself.
That's true.
And also one of the December trips you take annually as your entire friends group. I crashed your cool trip. So yeah, that's how I have interacted with Varun. But I'm so excited about getting to know you more. Starting with the icebreaker question, which is, if you could have dinner with any three people, dead or alive, who would it be and why?
Okay, I have to think a little bit about that one. That's a very unfair question. Like, I could totally have dinner with like 300 people. And I think Archana knows more. I'm a very social person. So it's very difficult to limit it to three people. But let's go with people that I haven't had dinners with. And then the three people would need to gel with each other and with me so that we would have a really fun dinner. So I think I'll go with Meryl Streep. And then probably Ellen.
Oh, wow. I love that.
And
Good choice.
I think who the third fun person would be. Should I go with J.K. Rowling? Or
I
should
knew
go
it.
With...
I knew it was going to be
Are
J.K.
you a
Rowling.
big Harry Potter head? Are you a
He
big
is.
Potterhead?
Let's go with J.K.
Head.
Rowling.
Yes.
No, wait, hang on. Let's do Lady Gaga. Yeah, and I think that'll be really fun company to have dinner with. Yeah, I mean, if you look at all three of them, they're amazing women at the top of their careers in a very male-dominated sort of spectrum. And all three of them are extremely pro equal human rights. And they're just amazing people. They do a lot of philanthropy. They advocate for all the right things. And, you can choose people from the past or the present. And there are probably 100,000 people who are doing amazingly well. But I think these are the kind of people who are role models to me. And if I had dinner with them, I think it'll be a really fun dinner because, they're great at what they do, but they can also let their hair down when they need to.
I love that. So that's the perfect combination. Cool. So we also want our listeners to get to know you a little more. So another question we had for you, Varun, was what were your early influences growing up in terms of maybe places, books, people, the environment you grew up in? What shaped you?
Yeah, I think one of the things that comes pretty easily and quickly is that, when you're an army kid, growing up is completely different from what most people would experience. So, for example, people ask me, where do you belong? Or where's your hometown? And I actually don't have an answer, right? I've actually never lived in a place long enough to call it my hometown, where at least my relatives stayed. So when it comes to places, we moved every 2 to 3 years. I think I must have grown up in at least 20 different cities. I actually had 13 schools.
Wow, you beat us.
You beat us. I think Aarti and I are at maybe 8 or 9.
For me, 7, yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty huge. And the other part is, wherever you would go, people would be entirely different. And it's not like you had the luxury of time to sort of be picky and choosy about how you would interact with people. You had to make friends almost right off the bat. It's a combination of influences, having a father who's in the army, having a mother who was, multiple roles. So she was a fashion designer, you could look at, she did an official course. She was supposed to go to Mexico. I'm saying Mexico, I mean Moscow. And she didn't because she had 2 young kids. And, she would have to move with dad when we got posted. She was a school teacher. And then I think what you can see with every army mom, they're amazing gardeners, cooks, and interior decorators.
And hosts.
All by themselves, right?
And hostess.
And hosts.
Yeah.
Right.
The endless parties that our mums have hosted. It's incredible.
Yeah. I think one of the things that really, really does grab on, and this is the cool part. So we didn't have a very specific identity. Technically, I'm a North Indian Hindu Rajput by ethnicity and religion combined, but we were never sort of strong-armed into religious beliefs. We were told very specific things about our culture, but the one message that was always repeated, and my parents repeated it, was that your conscience would tell you what was right or wrong. You actually didn't need a holy scripture or adults to tell you, and it was a very open sort of dialogue at all times, that if you felt something was wrong, you said it, right? And I think the focus came more externally than internally, but it had that application. It came externally because you would move every 2 years and you would have to make friends with people that were unlike you. Mm-hmm. You would have to go to schools where, there would be a mix of army kids that were from different areas as well as civilians that were local population of that areas. And you had to continue giving respect to everybody. And it worked. I mean, to the question that you asked earlier, I don't have a single source of identity other than saying, I'm just a person who's unique in his own way. But other than that, we are all the same.
Got it. That is so beautifully put.
I swear.
Thanks for sharing that. And I think I would also like to add to that is that Varun is probably the biggest Potterhead. He loves Harry Potter, just for, reference.
I forgot the books part, right?
Yeah, that's the biggest part. Like, that's how I remember you in college, standing in line for the latest books to be released and being the first one to get your hands on the latest copy. That was...
And having read it right before the exam. Like,
yes.
I had the exam when the 6th book was releasing. Yeah, the sixth book, when it was releasing, I had an exam on the same day. I got the book at 6 a.m. And I had read it by the time the exam was there, which was 1:30 p.m.
Whoa.
So in that period, I had read that book. And that was a thick book. But yeah, I've been crazy about reading. Reading was always something that was very highly encouraged in my family. I think at the very beginning, by class 2 or 3, I had not only read, but I'd heard several times as well and read all the classics. So Huckleberry Finn, Great Expectations, what do you call Hound of Baskerville, so a lot of Sherlock Holmes stories. All of these, Joe's Boys, Little Women, and all of these classics that were really amazing. And probably I read the abridged versions, not the full adult versions, but they were amazing stories, right? And then I remember I was in class third, and I was in this school called DAV Public School, Amritsar. And they had like a multi-story building dedicated as a library.
That's fantastic.
And they had every Enid Blyton book that you can think of. And I read all the ones, the ones about pixies and brownies and stuff like that.
Yeah.
All the way till Famous Five, Secret Seven, Adventure series.
Absolutely.
I read all of them. I was the only kid in school who was allowed to take, who was issued 10 books a week. Like you were only allowed two fiction and one like a course book, and they allowed me to take 10 books home a week, and I would still return them by Friday. Loved reading.
That's so delightful. Yeah, and I think any 90s kid associates with that, right? Books were such a large part of our childhood and growing up.
And TV was restricted.
We didn't have phones or tablets or laptops, so I absolutely agree with you there. The places that we were posted in, there was barely any cable, and television sets were very, uncommon. Awesome. Thanks for sharing that, Varun. That's beautiful. I think it helps our listeners get to know you a little better in terms of what your influences were. So, one of the things we want to do on the Global Desi podcast is really put ourselves in someone else's shoes, right? Especially when the experience is very distinct from ours. And so, Varun, I know I've been part of this journey with you, and I really hope that our listeners can learn and try to understand different perspectives on this podcast. So my question to you is, when did you first realize that you identified as being queer?
I actually don't know. I think I had an inkling somewhere all the way back to class 6, which is probably when I was, 11 years old, 11, 12. Yeah, but something that I'd mentioned earlier, my parents had always taught us that it was conscience that decided what was right or wrong. It was not a very talked about subject. And given that there was no internet, there was not a lot of access. So I just didn't know. I think it was all the way to class 11th or 12th when somebody actually told me that there was a term for how I felt. But even then, it didn't have a sort of scarring impact. Like, I think by then the roots had been laid so strongly that I didn't feel different. I didn't feel like I was something that was unacceptable or something, somebody who was any different. I think I sort of realized it a lot more in college. But even there, I was surrounded by such an amazing sort of group of friends. And by then, my personality had developed to the point where I could take on what, most people would probably consider bullying, but I would fight it back on an equal footing. So it never came out like getting bullied. Like, I would always crack a joke back if somebody tried cracking a joke. But I understand some very real world sort of consequences of it. I mean, for anybody who's felt even slightly different. I mean, look at you guys. You guys, sitting in another country, you're Indians. Whether or not, let's say in the office space, you have an extremely robust culture of inclusion, you always feel a slight bit of difference. It's not that it's bad or it's, it's...
Absolutely.
But it's you sort of made to notice it, right? And then think of feeling like that constantly, right? Because the older you grow, I think young people don't do it as much. At least in India, there's not as much bullying or hate, with younger people. The older you grow, the more it seems like people get rigid and they sort of make you feel like you're a different person, you're outside. And then there are some cultural, social connotations that also make you feel like that. Marriage is one of them. If you don't have marriage equality, you're always going to feel... I mean, when somebody tells you don't have the right to, right? When you look at your peers and friends and colleagues, getting married and having kids, it's just an observation thing where you start feeling more and more different, right? So I think... realizing that I was queer is a lifelong journey, and it gets worse with time rather than better. It was better much earlier, and not to the point that it gets worse with time. It just means that you observe more and more things that you expect out of life not coming your way, but you also get to meet thousands of people who are fighting the good fight, setting examples, and I'm super thankful. I feel if I wasn't queer, there are so many life experiences that I would have missed out on. So not going to trade it off, and still finding out what being queer is all about.
Thanks for sharing that. That's beautiful and really relate to a lot of things there, even in terms of just making you feel like the other, right? It could be anything, exactly like you mentioned, both Aarti and I having traveled, and even for you when, we travel outside of India, there's always this sense of you're different from others. And I think that definitely resonated in what you shared there. Just at a more individual level and at a societal level, how hard was the process for you in terms of, and you mentioned it's a journey, it's a continuous journey that's, that never really ends for all of us. What challenges would you say you faced at an individual level when you started sharing with people your truth, and how did you overcome them?
So definitely, one of the sort of privileged few, the lucky few, to not have had to go through something that was extremely tough. I mean, my parents were super chill about it. My friends were super chill about it. It's not that it wasn't a journey. I think I simply can't seem to remember or focus on the difficult parts. For some people, it does have a scarring impact. But in my case, I think by the time, and I came out when I was 16, by the time I came out, I was already given the love and support that makes a wholesome person, right? Mm-hmm. So from a challenges point of view, I don't think there was any specific challenge for me. But again, the comments, they're always there, right? You come out to a straight cis male friend and they'll always think, oh, you're not going to try and hit on me. And you're like, have you seen yourself in the mirror?
I love that.
Yeah. But it's just one of those things, right? And the other part, I think, surprisingly, I was extremely lucky, even post-college and even during college. One of the things was I was super into somebody who was in the closet. And that was sort of toxic for a while, right? Because you can't force another person out of the closet unless they're comfortable with it. I think especially in partnerships or attempted partnerships, a person who's in the closet may not have, may feel anger towards somebody who's outside because it's the other person is making it look easy, irrespective of what they had to go through, right? So that was a tough 7-8 years. The initial trying to date someone part, and then I was extremely lucky when it came to work. I joined a company where the CEO was queer. my hiring director was queer.
Wow.
And yeah, obviously all based out of the US. I was working for the Indian side. But in general, an extremely accepting and amazing sort of organization. And, it's always top driven down. So I didn't feel that pinch in my previous organization, but in my current organization, I definitely felt it. And something that I didn't realize or recognize because I was super confident with myself. I didn't feel the need to be out at the time, but it wasn't something that I was guarding as a secret, or I wasn't taking my full self to the work. I actually saw somebody else, get bullied, and then I saw, yet another colleague trying to launch the Pride chapter, and the kind of resistance that they were met with and the kind of comments that we heard in the process of launching that chapter. That's when I realized that, I really need to step up and step in front and be an out and visible person. Because if I don't, there are going to be many more who are not in the same circumstances as I am, and they're going to have very tough times in the organization.
That's so brave. And so fascinating. Varun, thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I had a question for you, which is both Sis and I are like big Bollywood heads in some ways, and also Hollywood heads. So, but from what
Entertainment in general.
But from what I remember in the 90s, I feel like queer people were often portrayed in Hindi cinema in kind of like a reductive manner, usually as a comic relief or like butterfall jokes kinds. And like Hollywood seemed to do a better job of it. Like I remember Philadelphia, that came out 1993. And in some ways, Hollywood was like ahead of its time. And I think Karan Johar kind of tried to make this whole idea of being queer more palatable for the closed-off Indian audience through movies like Dostana, Kal Ho Na Ho, Student of the Year. And more recently, we have more realistic, responsible representation of queer perspectives in entertainment with movies, with short films like Bollywood Talkies, Call Me by Your Name. Okay, more again international, but Kapoor and Sons, Made in Heaven. So, I want to know, according to you, what role does pop culture play in either aiding or diminishing like education around being queer?
Well, pop culture, plays an important role in any sphere, not just in, queer culture. It's a fun thing that we are highly entertaining people ourselves, and we're full of talent when it comes to dramatics. When it comes to movies, it does make a little more influence. But you know what? It's not that Bollywood didn't attempt it. There are movies, I think Fire was one of them.
Fire, Shabana Azmi.
And then which showed a lesbian relationship. And then we had My Brother Nikhil, which was on the same lines as Philadelphia. We had I Am, which is, I think, the same star as, My Brother Nikhil. But Philadelphia as well did not portray what it was supposed to portray. Like, it was not a completely realistic portrayal. It was about a man fighting a case. His partner was sort of deemed, and slightly irrelevant to the movie plot, right? So,
this was Denzel Washington, right? Who was the lawyer.
And this is. And Antonio Banderas was the partner who was sort of not mentioned too much in the movie. I think the thing to keep in mind is that by the end of it, movies are made for entertainment and they're made for making money, right? And I've heard a few queer directors say they will make these subject and art and, movies that speak out about a problem statement, but it does hold back from the creative process because sometimes they think that you might lose the creative process in trying to portray a message, right? And it's been the same with any other thing that you can think of, whether it's portrayal of Asians or blacks, or African Americans in Hollywood films, especially Arab, countries being portrayed and Arab nationalities and ethnicities being portrayed. So we've to come to a point where for people who are watching the movies, right, it is more palatable, right? Because it works both ways. You can make a movie that nobody wants to watch, but some people will watch it and it might change their mind. But the other part is people have to want to go and see a movie that may not represent the reality that they believe in, but does exist. Right. And I love what one of my coworkers said. They said, and they said this about my company. They said the culture is a safe one and one that is rapidly evolving to reflect the real world around us. Right. That's what we have to become. We have to rapidly evolve to see the world around us as it is, not as we see it fit.
Wow. Absolutely. What you just said gave me some insight into Karan Johar's head too, in terms of what he's trying to do, right? I mean, there is no malice there. I think it's coming from a good place too.
Yeah, it's one of those things. If you want to really do something, then go ahead and do it. You can't point at somebody else and say, you should be doing this. Right. And that's what happens. A lot of people will just criticize because they want to be morally correct. But when it comes to taking action, they're not taking that action. So you take the first action and then you can sort of guide other people, lead other people rather than criticize them into doing the right thing.
To your point about just that, about taking action, what do you think the reading down of Section 377 did for the LGBTQ movement in India? And what still remains to change post that?
Yeah, I mean, this is a question that I've answered once before, and it's not a small, it's not a quick and short question. You have to look at India in its entirety, get to where that law has come from, and then what it means for the people. I mean, this is, an over 5,000-year-old civilization that's been invaded again, first by the Mughals and then colonized by the British. And they weren't the only influences. Everybody, the Portuguese were trying to get a hold on us. The Dutch were trying to get a hold on us. So, yeah, I mean, it's an amalgamation. We integrated with everybody that invaded us. We sort of, welcomed them in. Although it had a lot of other sort of consequences where we lost a lot of our traditions, which were overridden, we still sort of integrated. And 377 was brought in as part of, the colonial era. That's why it's the same law that applies to several countries in the Southeast Asian subcontinent, because it was the British that put in 377. Now, a couple of things to understand is 377 says sexual practices against the order of the nature, but does not describe what they are. The second thing is when you look at Indian, the oldest Indian languages, we had over 50 words for different sexual and gender identities. So Pali, Prakrit, Sanskrit, we had multiple sexual and gender identities that were acceptable, and they were eroded by this law, which was, placed in. And once we got our independence, it was included into our constitution, and nobody made any provisions because this was the law that they tried to use to prevent, molestation of minors, right? So that's how the law was being used. We didn't actually codify the law till the late 80s, I believe. And even in that, we did not include boys. We included girls, but we didn't include boys when it came to minors. So the law had its sort of, acceptance. It wasn't that the general public was against homosexuality vocally, but the law was being misused and abused by the, let's say, police to sort of extort gay men. And very specifically gay men, because, for none of the other sort of spectrum LGBT in the any members of the LGBTQ community other than gays were sort of caught under 377. But yeah, once the ideally it should have been repealed by parliamentary process. That sort of gives citizens the confidence that the government is making strides and moves ahead. But it was a Supreme Court that had to intervene. I mean, Delhi High Court read it down in 2009. Supreme Court sort of reversed it in 2013, I believe. And then, it was finally read down in 2018 in Supreme Court. So, yeah, it's been quite an up and down. People are sort of getting used to it. But I think the biggest challenge that we faced as the LGBTQ community is that we have no resources for ourselves. So to educate others comes later. We are not even able to educate ourselves. The internet has been there for 10 years. Dating apps have been there for 5 years. We don't even know what a relationship should look like. We don't know what to expect from it, right? I mean, two men or two women dating, it's not the same dynamics as a man and a woman. And even that in India has been heavily prescribed through traditional arranged marriages. So when two accepting, loving partners want to be with each other, they actually have no role models. So we're making great strides. I mean, a lot of people are moving forward. A lot of organizations are pitching in, including corporates, which is a really great thing. We have pride in a lot of cities now. And I think the next fight is towards non-discrimination laws, towards marriage equality. There's a long way to go ahead. I think things have improved, but they don't change overnight. The only thing that I'm always sort of telling people who say, oh, you know what, this happened, eventually that will happen, is that while people are sort of putting this aside and then they're saying, okay, fine, we agree, we don't agree, eventually the courts will change the law. In that time, somebody's life is passing them by. The other thing is we've learned this over and over again. We've learned this from other nations. We've learned this with other sort of, sections of society. So why does it always take us 20 years to integrate women into leadership, and then 20 years to integrate African Americans into leadership, and then 20 years to integrate Asians into leadership, and now 20 years to integrate, LGBTQ people into leadership, and then 20 years to integrate people with disabilities into leadership? I mean, how many times do you need to learn the same lesson over and over again? And how many times, am I supposed to coach you on something? I mean, you're straight and you're cis. You expect me to use certain pronouns. You expect me to understand how your life goes because I should know that inherently. Then why am I supposed to educate you? You're supposed to take the onus of educating yourself to treat somebody the way you expect to be treated by them.
Absolutely. 100% agree. And definitely there's such a long way to go. To your point, history repeats itself, but we never seem to learn from it. But to your point, Varun, you mentioned a little earlier about what we can learn from other communities, other societies around the world. How do you compare your experiences or the conversations that are happening around being part of the LGBTQ community in India versus your travels around the globe, right? You've definitely worked in the US as well. So how do you compare those two?
I mean, it's an unfair sort of comparison given that your social or cultural nuances might be quite different, right? And the other part is each country has, or each area, location, if it's a state in the US, has gone through its own battle. So to undermine it, to say, oh, they have it and we don't, like to say, it's not to imply that they have it easily, right? Every country has gone through its own sort of journey to get where it is, and India is as well. The only thing is, and even in those countries, I don't think they have been 100% successful. Making the law does not change the global community's sort of mindset, right? Now, there are very specific obstacles to creating an equitable and equal world for LGBTQ individuals. I think one of the biggest challenges is how people interpret religion. Now, India has every religion on the planet, so we have every kind of discrimination that you can think of, but that also means we also have every kind of sort of learning to go from. I think it's not too bad. It would be nice if we had the same level of education, if we had the same level of investment, if we had the same level of freedom of rights and laws applicable. But we're on a journey. We'll get there.
So, in the spirit of educating and being educating ourselves, what is a common myth about the LGBTQ community, and can you debunk it for us?
Common myth. I mean, think of it this way: it's a myth that is meant to keep people that are not like you, and that's not specific to the LGBTQ community, but whatever it is that you don't like about them, whether it's your, sort of religious opinion or anything else that you can think of, myths that are meant to keep communities apart and to ensure that other people are not treated in the same manner as you are. They're just wrong. I mean, by the end of it, I think the thing that gets to people most is not a specific myth. The myth is just a factor that overlays their thought process, which is you break it down to you consider the other person just one sexual act and nothing more. I mean, my personality is so much more. I'm a son, I'm a brother, I'm a friend, I'm somebody's boss at work, I report into somebody at work, I lead the Pride chapter for my organization. There's so many things, so many parts to another person that you just gloss over with this tag of LGBTQIA, right? It's no more a part of our personality than being heterosexual is a part of a heterosexual person's identity, or the amount of pigment in your skin dictates how you think, right? So whatever the myths are, whether it is that we have an agenda, we have a lifestyle, that we are here to convert other people, I think that's the one. I think that's the one I want to address, that we are here to convert other people. God, no. I mean, we don't want other people to go through the kind of crappy lives that we go through. We wouldn't wish it on our worst enemies, if that helps, right? There's no agenda. We don't want more people on our side. I mean, till the time the world doesn't change, we hope that every kid that is born, it doesn't have to go through the sort of, doesn't have to live in the world that we have created today. I mean, imagine this: a transgender adult is 47% of transgender adults ideate or attempt suicide, as opposed to 4% of average population. Mental health issues, one in 4 adults is likely to have severe mental health issues. LGBTQ populations, the number doubles, 1 in every 2. I mean, we're definitely doing something grievously wrong here, right? As a society, as a community, and you just need to sort of get over it. I mean, your personal homophobia doesn't hurt anybody as long as it's personal. But the moment you think it's dictated by God, or that they're going to ruin marriage institutions, or they want to convert your kids, every individual just wants to live their life, and that's the request. Please let them live their lives. If anything, they might contribute to society and make it a little better. Alan Turing played such a major role in saving so many lives and ensuring that the Allies won against the Nazis. But it's only years after his death that he was posthumously sort of pardoned and granted knighthood. But he was chemically castrated and driven to suicide, right? And for all his brains and for all of his, nationalism and his, ability to make the world a greater place, people didn't see him beyond one sexual act.
So beautifully put, Varun. I think it really brings home the fact that we as a society have always been afraid of the other, right? The other can be, like you mentioned, caste, gender, sexuality, the color of your skin, your ideology, your thoughts. And I think it's high time we all look within ourselves to try and see why there is that insecurity and why we are afraid, and really open up the dialogue and conversation. And I think you've really helped us do that on this episode. So thank you so much for that. Lastly, what advice would you give someone who is considering coming out? And alternately, what advice on the flip side of that, right? What advice would you have for family and friends to be a true ally in someone's coming out journey?
Yeah, I mean, for somebody who's coming out, that's a journey that everybody has to take on their own. Now, frankly, heterosexual people don't have to come out. Cis male and females don't have to come out, right? So you don't have to come out in the sense, we've worded it like coming out, but you're not coming out. Other people need to open their eyes and see who you really are. This is their journey. You already know who you are.
I love that.
And I always say this,
I love that. Gosh.
If you want to show respect and love to somebody else, self-respect and self-love are extremely crucial. So you have to be at peace with yourself and you have to love yourself. And if you find it hard doing that because you listen to the outside voices too much, then there are other voices that will support you, right? There are groups, there are people who will understand you and love you for who you are, and you need to reach out to them and you need to talk to them. I know it's difficult to break ties with family and friends, but are they really family and friends if they don't accept you for who you are? Then you need to find yourself a new family and friends. Obviously, you have to give everybody time. I think for families, what is very important is when somebody, when a queer person comes out, and I've given this advice to several families, that take your time to process, take your time to, learn and educate yourself. And if after all of that you can't accept, then that's a different thing. But your instant reaction cannot be of hate and worse, disappointment, right? Outright hate is sometimes easier to deal with than hate. So if your child comes out to you, or a family member comes out to you, you should say, we love you. And if you don't understand, you can say, I need more time to understand this. But do not show hate or disappointment, because that will fracture somebody's personality. And
that's fantastic. And I think you've pretty much brought it all home with that. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Yes, you absolutely have. And from all of your conversation and our conversation that we've had today, I have had so many takeaways. Even to your point just about the whole coming out piece, right? Like as a cisgendered woman, like having a good relationship with myself is also something that, all of us might still be struggling with, right? And there's so many layers, and I just really appreciate how your entire perspective has been, first of all, super enlightened from your side, but also enlightening. Also, just how broad it's been in terms of how empathetic you are towards where other people are coming from, just capturing so many broad perspectives. It's been all encompassing in some ways and just so level-headed and optimistic too. Like, I think you definitely had such an underlying current of just optimism in each and every one of your responses, and it was just super inspiring. Thank you so much for sharing.
Varun, keep that up. And I think you're the ever optimist, and that's one of the reasons I think our friendships also kept on for so many years, because you have such positive vibes going. Keep it up. So proud of you. And so finally, what does the term global Desi mean to you, Varun? Because you're on a podcast which is called Life of a Global Desi. So how do you identify as a global Desi?
Technically, if you're global, should you even be Desi? But I think
that's interesting. Something for us to think about.
But you know what? You can be a global Desi, because I think it was us who coined the phrase Vasudev Kutumbakam, which means, the entire world is my home. Right. They do these DNA tests now to see where you're originally from. I mean, you really don't need to do that. We're part of one race, right? We're all the children of one God, no matter which God you believe in. And no matter, whether it's our looks, the pigment of our skin, whether it's our cultures, whether it's our, sexual orientations, our gender identities, by the end of it, we're all aspiring, to live a good and happy life, right? And I think that's what Global Desi is sort of implies, right? Desi or Indian, we believe in community and family, and in being together as a well-knit group. And the moment we become global, we spread that message to everybody else.
I love that word.
I love
So many
that.
things, so many light bulb moments on this episode, and hopefully for our listeners too. Thank you for sharing that perspective, Varun. We absolutely loved having you on. And where can our listeners find you, and how can they reach out to you?
Well, I'm active on LinkedIn and Instagram. Not a super social media person, but you can find me on Instagram at LooneyMooney29. So there's another
Love it.
Harry Potter reference for you.
Thank you so much.
And
Yep.
thank you guys. I had an amazing time, and it's always fun talking to you guys. And I think what you're doing is beautiful. It's amazing. I think that's what we need to do. We need to talk more with more people, get their sort of views, pass them out, let people have their views and listen to those, and just sort of address all these major and minor topics, because the world is full of a lot of good things and a lot of bad things right now, and there is no prioritization for if even one person if it is impacted by one issue, we need to talk about it. And it's amazing that you guys are doing that, and you're bringing fun and joy and probably even hope to so many people.
Thank you so much. It
that is
definitely
so
makes us
sweet.
feel great. And thanks for being part of the conversation. Absolutely agree that we just want to keep up the dialogue and hope that people stay curious and, keep listening to each other. I think that's really our mantra here. So thank you, Varun. Thank you again.
Thank you so much.
Hey, Desis. If you enjoyed this episode, then please rate, review, and subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you're listening to podcasts.
And drop us a note on lifeofaglobaldesi@gmail.com or our social media to keep up this awesome dialogue.
Oh, and don't forget to give us a 5-star rating.
You're so cheap. Why are you asking them for 5-star ratings?
Well, I always ask for the rating I want, not the one I have. Like dress for the job you want, not the one you have.
That's like the stupidest thing I've heard all day.
Aarti, you're so judgmental. You need to stop being
Listen,
judgmental.
I just think you can't be so demanding. That's all.
You ask for what you want.
But